The terrifying acid bath murderer. The techniques used by John Haigh to dispose of his victim aren't enough to give one nightmares, but there are always remnants of proof. John George Haigh was born into a typical family and was raised in the West Riding of Yorkshire after moving from Lincolnshire. Because of his love of classical music and his proficiency on the piano, the young man was awarded scholarships to Wakefield Cathedral and Queen Elizabeth Grammar School. Haigh was teased in school and had a peculiar sense of humor. An enthusiast for peculiar antics, he would unseat the aging organist by pulling the stool from beneath her as she settled in to play. In addition, he drove a pig around its stall until it passed away from weariness. He got beaten for this. Haigh began working as an apprentice engineer at a company after completing his education. After that, he was let go for putting sugar in his boss's gas tank. He worked in advertising and insurance for a while before getting dismissed again for allegedly robbing the cash box. Haigh wed Betty Hamer in 1934. The marriage, however, didn't last long because he was arrested for automobile fraud 4 months later and given a 15-month prison sentence. When Betty divorced Haigh, she gave birth to a daughter who was placed for adoption while he was serving his sentence. After being freed from prison in 1936, Haigh relocated to London. William McSwan, the owner of the arcade, hired him as a chauffeur. McSwan would eventually become his first victim. He quit his job at McSwan and took on a new identity as William Cato Adamson. Adamson was a solicitor who offered fictitious stocks and shares to gullible clients out of several locations, including ones in Guildford, Surrey, and London. When someone saw that his false surname was misspelled on his letterhead, the hoax came to an end. He spent numerous years in and out of prison after receiving a 4-year term for fraud. Haigh realized during his final period of incarceration that he was always getting caught because his victims may report him to the police. Haigh discovered from this source that French killer Georges Alexander Serret had used sulfuric acid to dispose of the bodies of his victims. Anxious to test the technique, Haigh started experimenting in his cell with field mice and acid. After being freed from prison in 1943, Haigh was prepared to start his murderous rampage. McSwan William. After being released from prison, Haigh met McSwan by coincidence at a Kensington tavern. McSwan was now collecting rent from his parents' London houses while working for Donald and Amy. On September 6, 1944, McSwan vanished from sight. Afterward, Haigh acknowledged that he had lured McSwan into the basement of 79 Gloucester Road and killed him with a bludgeon. His desire for McSwan's lifestyle was motivated by jealousy. He doused himself with strong sulfuric acid and buried himself in an industrial barrel. When Haigh returned 2 days later, the barrel's remaining contents could be poured down the sewer. McSwan, Donald, and Amy. Haigh had disclosed to William's parents that he had fled to Scotland to evade being conscripted into the armed forces. Haigh retained the money for himself after taking over his collecting responsibilities. With the war concluding, the parents started to wonder why their son hadn't returned from Scotland. Assuring them that he was returning for a visit, Haigh enticed Donald and Amy to the Gloucester Road home on July 2, 1945, hoping to see their son. Haigh killed them with a blowtorch in the cellar, disposing of them in the same manner as their son. Haigh moved into the Onslow Court Hotel after stealing the pensions and properties worth a total of £8,000, about £250,000, from his 3 victims. In 1947, Haigh's heavy gambling addiction was beginning to cause financial difficulties. Haigh needed to find a new victim to replenish his supplies. After moving the acid barrels down from Kensington, he started renting a tiny workshop in Crawley, Sussex, which is about an hour's drive from London. Haigh continued to reside at the Onslow Court Hotel and identified himself as an engineer by 1949. But again, he was getting low on cash, so he went looking for his last victim. Olive Durant Deacon. Olive, a 69-year-old widow, shared an Onslow Court Hotel residence with her wealth. She told Haigh about her idea for fake fingernails because she knew he was purportedly an engineer. Haigh used the occasion to extend an invitation to Olive to visit his Crawley workshop. Olive accompanied him for the hour-long drive to his workshop on February 18, 1949, when he used Dr. Henderson's handgun to shoot her in the neck. She was wearing an expensive black Persian fur coat, which he took off for her, along with her jewelry, before putting her in the acid bath. 2 days later, Olive's friend Constance Lane reported her missing. Olive was given the case of Sergeant Alexandra Lambourne, who came to Constance Lane, Constance described Olive to Sergeant Lambourne as a strong-willed, reclusive woman who detested people and crowds. She claimed that any time she left her hotel room, she made sure to wear certain jewelry, such as rings and a pearl necklace. John Haigh, who was speaking to Sergeant Lambourne, said he had seen Olive that day before she left the hotel, and that she was wearing her black Persian fur coat. Lambourne thought it strange that Haigh resided at a hotel with mostly elderly guests. She suspected that Haigh could be involved because she had a bad feeling about him. Inspector Symes sent out a description to all police divisions, but by that evening, he had become suspicious of Haigh because of Lambourne's remarks. Symes and Detective Inspector Webb went back to the Onslow to speak with Miss Robbie, the hotel manager. She informed them that Haigh was always alone and that he drove a fancy automobile and dressed expensively. In addition, he lately neglected to pay for his lodging, which he finally did 2 days before Olive vanished. Webb and Symes went upstairs to Hay's chamber, where he extended an invitation for them to chat. He remembered saying the same thing he'd said to Lambourne in the morning. He also mentioned that Olive had departed the foyer with a red bag in her arms. John Haigh was unaware, though, that Inspector Symes was already acquainted with him. Years before, he had questioned Haigh and realized he was a scammer. That day, he had been the only person to see her claim solitary exit from the hotel. Symes started the process of entering the Crawley workshop. The sideboards of the workshop were strewn with empty bottles of sulfuric acid, tools, and a few cartons. There was minimal light entering the building because the windows were painted over. A locked leather hat box was the lone object that appeared out of place and was turned into evidence. After forcing the hat box open, Symes was reported on its contents. It held Dr. Henderson's handgun, 8 rounds of ammo in an envelope, thick red cellophane paper, and a receipt for a black Persian fur coat from a dry cleaner near Crawley. Officers conducted a town and area canvass. Olive was immediately spotted by a bookkeeper at the George Hotel in Crawley, who remembered her red purse and black fur coat. Haigh was also familiar to her, as the driver Olive had used to go to the bathroom at the hotel. A jeweler in Horsham, a nearby town, recognized Haigh as the person who had sold him the pieces after seeing some jewelry that matched Olive's. While the investigating officers drove to the hotel to search Hay's room, Haigh was detained at the police station. A few hours later, they were back at the station with a few more goods. On Wednesday, August 10, 1949, 500 people gathered outside Wandsworth Prison to witness the hanging of John George Haigh, the acid bath murderer. Did you like it? Tell us what you think of the video in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting videos.